seed. Infect versus Rug Delver. Both players have shuffled up and resolved mulligans, so we are going to give them the green light to go ahead here. Our backup match is going to be Jared versus Greg, Mud versus Painter. So if this match gets done early, we'll try to go to that one, see how that one plays out. So Tom Ross leads with a Gitaxian Probe. He goes down to 18, and Jessy reveals a hand of Double Lightning Bolt, Force of Will, Brainstorm, Scalding Tarn, Misty Rainforest, and a Tropical Island. So no creatures, but he does have 2 removal spells along with a Force of Will.
This is a pretty powerful opening from Jessy, although Tom can navigate around these Lightning Bolts as long as he is under no pressure. So if Jessy can find a Delver of Secrets or even a Nimble Mongoose relatively soon, this is about as good of a draw as he can ask for, but those 2 bolts are not going to hold off Tom forever.
So Tom leads with a Misty Rainforest. Jessy leads with a Tropical Island. He does not actually play the Scalding Tarn or the Misty Rainforest, so he's technically, right now, he does not have access to Bolt mana. He did draw a Ponder for the turn, so Tom's going to sacrifice his Misty Rainforest to find a Tropical Island.
And both of these players, I believe, are playing with Stifle in their list, so there's going to be some jockeying over fetch lands in this match as well.
Yes, so 2 Stifles from Tom and 3 Stifles from Jessy. Tom leads with a Noble Hierarch here, one of those cards that kind of helps him generate more mana. It also allows him to play a slower, grindy game with his Infect creatures, pumping them, not always needing a giant pump spell like Invigorate or Berserk. So Jesse's going to sacrifice his Scalding Tarn now that he sees the coast is clear. There is no Stifle effects. He's going to get a Volcanic Island.
And remember, Tom is playing with 4 main deck copies of Daze, so I'm really curious to see how Jessy is going to sequence his spells. There's a lot that he has to play around out of Tom's deck.
Yeah, Jessy does not. Both players know the deck list because in the top 8, so they know exactly what they have to play against. Jessy leads with a Lightning Bolt, and we're going to see an Invigorate. So Tom actually uses an Invigorate to protect his Noble Hierarch. So very aggressive play here from Tom. Does not want to lose that Noble Hierarch.
Not surprising to see him value that Noble Hierarch quite highly on the heels of missing his second land drop.
So Jessy draws a Nimble Mongoose this turn, and he casts it after the Lightning Bolt.
Looks like Tom is contemplating whether or not he wants to daze this, and he does.
Wow, so daze from Tom to keep the Nimble Mongoose off the board. He still knows about the second Lightning Bolt in Jessy's hand, along with a Force of Will and a Brainstorm, I believe. So, yep, Blighted Agent comes down for Tom, and he has his first Infect creature on the board, which is going to get countered with a Force of Will, pitching a Ponder.
Pretty good use of Force of Will there, I feel like, by Jessy. Even though that Lightning Bolt can kill the Blighted Agent, it's just risky trying to fight through Tom's various free or close to free pump spells that way. So good opportunity to land Force of Will. Yeah,
we just saw the Invigorate there. It looks like Tom does have a second Invigorate in his hand along with the Berserk and a Stifle. So yes, that Blighted Agent could have technically been lethal next turn.
Yep.
So Jesse's going to cast a Ponder here off a Tropical Island, and he doesn't like those 3 cards, so he's going to shuffle up and get 1 free card here.
So Tom's kind of petered out here a little bit. He does need to find another Infect creature. And an update from the other side of our bracket here. Jared Betcher quickly up a game against Greg Spano.
Wow, so that was pretty fast. We're like 3 minutes into the round.
2 ships passing in the night right there.
So it looks like Jessy, off his random draw, drew a Delver of Secrets. He's going to lay a Misty Rainforest for the turn. So I think currently Tom only is aware of a Lightning Bolt left in his hand and possibly a Brainstorm. So Delver of Secrets gets cast here.
And that's a really important draw here for Jessy. As good as his start's been blunting Tom's offensive, we know that Tom is threatening to win the game with another Infect creature. That's all it takes from this spot. So it's really important for Jessy to get some pressure online to force Tom to find it quickly.
So Tom here, he doesn't have, like you said, he doesn't have another Infect creature. He did draw a Gitaxian Probe, so if he wants to, he can cast that and try to draw into another Infect creature. Let's see what he's going to do here. He's just going to swing over for 1 here.
And Tom quickly on to plan B.
It's going to be an uphill struggle because he did use that Invigorate, so Jessy is only at 20. So Jessy does reveal an instant, so Delver flips into Insectile Aberration.
Also really important for Jessy, again. Needs to just find pressure quickly and then keep Tom off of finding an Infect creature in time.
Yeah, so Great position here for Jessy. He's got the Delver of Secrets online now, so he can actually put some pressure. He still has that Brainstorm along with another Lightning Bolt in his hand. So, so far, pretty good shape. Let's see, he's going to cast the Brainstorm main phase to try to find more action. Looks like he has 2 lands there and a Thought Scour.
Thought Scour, a card you occasionally see in some of these lists. And this is another plan B you see from Tom. Invigorating berserking rather, the Insectile Aberration inside of combat to try to kill it post-combat.
So Tom obviously thinks that he can win if he just gets a little more time. He just wants to make sure that Jessy can't put any more pressure on him.
So that, of course, causes the Insectile Aberration to hit for 6 instead of 3, but Tom has dealt with the threat.
So Tom's at 10 now after sacrificing the Windswept Heath to get a Tropical Island. And Jessy is left out of threats, and he's going to use the Stifle here to stop the Mystery Rainforest activation. So now Jessy is just left with a Tropical Island and a Volcanic Island in play. We know he has a Lightning Bolt in his hand. So even though Tom doesn't have an Infect creature, he still is able to take care of Jessy's threats. So yeah, we see a Thought Scour, Brainstorm, and a Lightning Bolt get revealed for Tom. So despite the fact that he doesn't have any threats in play, he still has 2 card drawing spells to try to get him into a bigger threat like Tarmogoyf or Dervil Secrets.
And the Thought Scour is actually really important for Jessy here because I believe he set 2 lands back with that Brainstorm the previous turn with the intent on shuffling with his fetch land. He now has the option of Thought Scouring himself to clear out any of the trash.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised he didn't Thought Scour himself on his upkeep knowing that the 2 lands were on top of his library. Like maybe he just wants at least 1 more land in play in case of Wasteland, because he knows Tom does have 1 Wasteland in his deck.
Yeah. It's also with this Brainstorm, he gets another shot to reset too. So there's no pressure for him to do it right away, but it is another avenue that he has afforded to him.
So Jessy cast the main from his Brainstorm. Not sure if he drew a threat there. Looks like he did draw a Tarmogoyf. So he does have 1 threat to kind of put some pressure on Tom. Tarmogoyf being probably a 4 or 5 power creature at this point in the game.
Yeah, I would imagine we have instant sorcery land creature at the minimum ready to go.
So Jessy puts 2 cards on top. He kept a Scalding Tarn, so he's a little wary of a second Stifle, but he is going to go for it. And this one looks like it will get sacrificed, and he's going to be able to search out for a Tropical Island, which will allow him to cast the Tarmogoyf this turn.
But I believe that Tom has picked up Daze in his last draw step here, so this could be really rough for Jessy if this Tarmogoyf gets dazed, as he's left with no pressure in the event that this spell fails to resolve.
And yes, Tom did draw a Daze, so Tarmogoyf is going to get dazed and yet another threat. Despite the fact that Tom doesn't really have any creature removal in his deck, he was able to deal with now 2 threats. Actually 3 threats, I believe, from Jessy's deck. So pretty impressive, although Tom still needs to find that Infect creature.
Yeah, Berserk is a little some assembly required removal spell, but it did get the job done on that Insectile Aberration.
So Tom just plays a Verdant Catacombs. That will be able to find him a Dryad Arbor, so he'll be able to put a little more pressure on Jessy. Jessy's at 15 right now, so we might see those Invigorates get hard cast pretty soon.
Yep. I'm not sure this is exactly how Tom wanted game 1 to go, but so far keeping his head above water in spite of pretty reasonable opening here from Jessy.
And this is kind of what we talked about before the match. You know, it doesn't matter. Tom just finds ways to win. So attacks with the Dryad Arbor. The trigger goes on the stack, and it gets +1/+1. So he attacks for 2. Jessy's at 13 now. Yeah, Tom just draws yet another land for the turn. He has a Tropical Island, and he's just going to pass the turn. Jessy draws a Force of Will, so he has some permission, but again, no threat. We know he has that Lightning Bolt in his hand, but he doesn't want to use it just yet. Again, he knows that Tom has a lot of pump spells in his deck.
Yeah, and I've been in this position before that Jessy's in right now. I actually got killed by damage out of an Infect deck in the Modern Grand Prix because I didn't want to kill Noble Hierarchs and such, but the damage does add up over time, and the deck plays a ton of pump spells. So eventually, those creatures get lethal.
So Lightning Bolt is targeting the Dryad Arbor, and Tom did have the option of casting Invigorate, but he chose to let it resolve. And here, really good draw for Tom. He finally drew a pseudo-infect creature in a crop rotation, like you mentioned, that can be used to search out a Inkmoth Nessus.
Yeah, really gives Tom's deck a whole new dimension.
So it looks like Nimble Mongoose will resolve for Jessy, And a crop rotation is going to attempt to get cast, and that will get Force of Will, pitching a Spell Pierce. So unfortunately, Tom loses a land, and he's not able to search out an infect creature here. And a little too late, Tom draws a Force of Will of his own, although it looks like Jessy is out of gas. He has a Nimble Mongoose in play, but that Nimble Mongoose will get blocked by Noble Hierarch, and then Invigorate will get cast. Jessy did draw a Spell Pierce for the turn, but Tom used the alternate casting cost of it, so he did have mana to pay for it.
This is a very weird game from Tom so far, to say the least, but he has been able to fend off all of Jesse's creatures thus far.
So Jessy still doesn't have any creatures in play. He has that Spell Pierce in his hand, and I believe he might just have lands and Spell Pierce. Tom did draw a Vines of the Vastwood, so in addition to that Invigorate, he also has Vines as creature pump. So Jessy draws another land. This time it's a Wasteland, so it's protection around Inkmouth Nexus, if that ever gets drawn by Tom. Tom now drew another Vines of the Vastwood, so he has a lot of pump in his hand, along with the Force of Will.
He is getting within range.
Yeah, he has Force of Will, Stifle, and then 3 pump spells.
He's just drawn Berserk.
Oh, wow.
So now Tom might be able to actually win game 1 manual style here through damage.
Good old Noble Hierarch. So Tom is just going through the motions now, trying to make sure he maximizes mana. We might just see him starting to deploy Vines of the Vastwood now, just because he doesn't have enough mana to do everything. But we'll see what he wants to do here. We're going to see Jesse's going to do a main phase Thought Scour, targeting Tom. Let's see what Tom wants to do. He's going to let it resolve. And we see a Daze and a Misty Rainforest get milled, and Jessy just draws, it looks like it might have been a Lightning Bolt.
I can't tell if that was a Lightning Bolt or a Volcanic Island.
Yeah, it might have been a Black Bordered Volcanic Island. I'm not sure. Tom draws an Inkmouth Nexus, but again, there is a Wasteland on Jesse's side of the board, so that's not going to be that effective right now. Tom does have a Stifle, so he could stifle the Wasteland effect, but let's see how he wants to play this. He's been attacking for regular damage for the most part of this game, so
he also has Vines potentially protected as well.
That's
so he has a lot of ways to fight over this Wasteland if he's feeling so inclined.
He could actually activate the Inkmouth, make it a creature, and then Vines it.
And the fact that Tom didn't attack there, if you're Jessy, you got to be really concerned, because it means he has something to do potentially with all of that mana.
Yeah, it looks like he's just going to try to go for the Berserk kill. He's got Force of Will backup. Like you said, he's got Vines as well. So Jessy is going to try to go for the Wasteland now on his main phase. Tom will activate it, and it looks like we're going to see a Vines here, which is exactly what happened. So this gives it hexproof, and or it can't be targeted by opponent's effects. And in response, Jessy drew a Fire Knight, so he's going to try to fire it.
Yeah, and the reason that Tom did this instead of the Stifle is because he has Force of Will in hand and no other blue card.
Yeah.
So he wants to have access to Force of Will in case something goes wrong. He may not have enough mana to Vines multiple times in one turn, nor the need to do so if he has Invigorate plus Berserk.
So Tom, it looks like we're going to see another Vines here to protect it yet again. Jessy does have that Spell Pierce. Unfortunately, Tom does have 2 mana to pay for it. And it looks like Jessy might just try. I'm not sure if he has another Spell Pierce. And he has a Daze here. So let's see. Are we going to see a Force of Will here for Tom? He does have an Invigorate and a Berserk in his hand, so that is lethal if it resolves. And it looks like, yes, he is going to keep his Inkmouth Nexus in play. So quite the counter battle here. Inkmouth, Vines, Force of Will. Tom is able to keep his Inkmouth in play, and now if he can actually activate it, attack, Invigorate, Berserk, he will win on the following turn.
Yeah, he has to sense some amount of weakness there from Jessy. I mean, it requires a lot for him to be able to play further into that sequence. So,
yeah, basically the way this played out, Tom has to put Jessy on not having a Bolt or another way to kill the Inkmouth Nexus.
And now Jessy has to deliberate here. You know, what's the last card and the last 2 cards in his hand? Are they actually Berserk Invigorate or Berserk Vines?
Yeah, if you're Tom, I have to imagine you're just going to go for it here.
And he drew an Invigorate as insurance, so that makes it even easier.
So he stifles first activation, but Tom can still activate it with another mana. Jessy is going to fall to Invigorate here. And, oh, wow. So Jessy did have the Lightning Bolt. Wow. So great play there by Jessy. He actually did have the Lightning Bolt, but I'm not sure if he had the mana on his turn. He didn't have enough red on his turn.
Yep. And you can see Jesse's just trying to figure out exactly what happened there. Kind of a weird game. Tom pressured him actually with damage, and that forced some amount of response from him and had just enough resources to plow through Jesse's plethora of removal spells, wastelands. Just a really incredible game.
Yeah, pretty tricky play there by Jessy. It looked like he had the lightning bolt the whole time. He could have tried to kill the Inkmouth Nexus on his turn during that entire battle, but I guess he was thinking, okay, well, maybe I can kill it when he tries to go for it, which would have worked had Tom not drawn a second Invigorate.
Right,
so pretty impressive sequence there for Tom Ross there. He was able to kind of switch gears, going back and forth, constantly putting pressure on Jessy the entire time.
And let's also go back to some other odd plays. I'll Berserk your Insectile Aberration. I'll block your Nimble Mongoose and invigorate my own Noble Hierarch. So a lot of Jesse's pressure got blunted. The Tarmogoyf got dazed. That's pretty nuts and bolts legacy play. We've seen that before. But the use of Invigorate and Berserk as removal spells periodically through the game also gave Tom the time to assemble the hand required to go over Jessy.
Yeah, so pretty impressive play there for Tom. He's able to win the first game, so he's up one game in our best of 5 series here. And now we're going to do a little trivia for you. We do this during the top 8 of all of our open series and the invitationals. During the quarterfinals, semifinals, and the finals, we're going to be giving away 3, 6, and 1 year's worth of premium content at SCGINVI@StarCityGames.com. And basically what happens is we'll ask you a question. You tweet us the answer at SCG Live, hashtag SCG Premium. Again, speed doesn't matter. Accuracy is all that matters. We will pick one person at random, and we will announce the winner after this round. So you want to help to toss off the premium question?
I got a question. I got a question ready. We wondered in that first game, why did Jessy decide to Thought Scour Tom? And the reason is to potentially grow a Tarmogoyf, because Tom is playing a single copy of an enchantment in his deck. Name that enchantment. Again, tweet the answer at SCG Live, hashtag SCG Premium. Of the correct respondents, one will be drawn at random to receive 3 free months of Star City Games Premium. It is about accuracy and not speed, so don't worry about being the first person to submit a question, just having the correct answer.
Yes, and cheating is allowed. If you don't know Tom Ross personally and his deck list, feel free to go over to StarCityGames.com. The invitational list deck list should be available online there.
Again, name the single enchantment in Tom Ross's main deck.
So the single enchantment in Tom Ross's main deck, you will be able to see that in the deck lists that are online at StarCityGames.com. Meanwhile, we're going to go back to the match here. Both players are sideboarding for game 2 here. And looking over the sideboards, on Jesse's side, he's down a game. What does he need to do to come back?
Well, he has access to a Gravedigger's Cage, a Scavenging Ooze, an Arcane Laboratory, a Sylvan Library, an Ancient Grudge, a Destructive Revelry, 3 copies of Pyroblast, a Elemental Blast, a Spell Pierce, 2 Submerges, a Surgical Extraction, and a Rough Tumble. I think you're going to see Rough Tumble come in. Pyroclasm Effect's pretty solid against. In fact, I think you're going to see the 2 copies of Submerge. Again, cheap or free ways to interact with what Tom's doing. The Spell Pierce seems good to me here. The Pyroblast and the Red Blast are a little bit on the narrow side, but they can fight over things such as Blighted Agent. I actually think Arcane Laboratory could potentially be very good in this matchup, as Tom's combo is predicated on chaining together multiple spells in a turn in most scenarios. He can win manual style. He can win through just hitting with infect creatures, pumped by Noble Hierarch and casting 1 pump spell a turn. But you saw in those games, it was really important for Tom to be able to play Invigorate plus Berserk, or multiple Vines in 1 turn. So Arcane Lab could do a lot of good work here.
Yeah, the only issue with Arcane Lab is basically you can't proactively attack any of Tom's creatures, because if he has a pump spell, that's it. It's resolved. The game's over. However, like you said, a lot of Tom's deck is revolved around casting multiple spells in a turn. So we'll see what Jessy decides to do. Jessy leads off with a Tropical Island here in game 2. Does not have either a Ponder or a 1-drop. So we'll see how this game progresses. Tom also has a Tropical Island and no 1-drop of his own.
With Arcane Lab in play, you can imagine Jessy playing a game of, Tom attacks, and if he uses a pump spell, you can bolt or counter the pump spell, and if he doesn't do anything else, you can try to use a kill spell at the end of Tom's turn. If he has a pump spell to save his guy, that's okay, and if not, that's great too.
So Jessy plays a Tarmogoyf. Currently, there are no cards in the graveyard. Tom plays Inkmouth Nexus and a Blighted Agent, which it looks like it might meet with a Force of Will. So Brainstorm will get pitched to cast Force of Will from Jessy. Jessy goes down to 18. Let's see what Tom does. Is it going to resolve? Yes, it does resolve. So Blighted Agent goes to the graveyard. However, there is an Inkmouth Nexus in play, so Tom does have a pseudo-infect creature in play.
Yeah, I'm not clear if that Force of Will means that Jessy just wanted to fight over there and grow his Tarmogoyf, or if he doesn't have a bolt, or potentially even red mana right now. But if he doesn't have red mana and he doesn't have a wasteland here, Tom has a lot of leverage to start just going for it.
Yes, so Tom is tapped out, so potentially Jessy could have been sandbagging the Scalding Tarn, simply playing around Stifle. So now he does play Scalding Tarn, he finds that red mana, so now he has access to red with Volcanic Island. And let's see what he wants to do here. Tarmogoyf is currently a 3-power creature. But again, because of that Inkmouth Nexus, Tom still potentially can just win out of nowhere.
It could be next turn. It could be as soon as next turn.
It could be next turn. So Jessy has to constantly be aware of that. He has to be very careful with his mana. But it looks like he's going to just go main phase Vendilion Clique. So that's great because it will resolve. It provides him a blocker for the Inkmouth Nexus, and it gives him information on Tom's hand and potentially take a very powerful card in it.
Yeah, I like the proactive use of Vendilion Clique here. Not getting fancy. You know, Tom didn't fight over the Tarmogoyf last turn or his own Blighted Agent, so it's unlikely that Daze is in his hand. And you don't want to mess around here.
So Tom reveals a hand of Invigorate, double Vines of the Vastwood, a Forest, a second Inkmouth Nexus, and a Stifle. So it looks like Invigorate will get taken, and Tom will get to draw another card, and it looks like it's a Dryad Arbor.
Invigorate's the best card, I believe, to take there by Jessy. I like the play. Tom's bottleneck right now is mana, and Invigorate's, of course, a free pump spell.
So Tom drew a Pendelhaven, so that is going to be effective with his Inkmouth Nexus if we get to the point where Tom decides to just start attacking with it. Again, Jessy does have a blocker with Vendilion Clique. However, because Tom has a second Nexus in his hand, he might be okay just trading it there.
Yeah, the risk here, of course, is that by Tom trying to finagle and trade with Vendilion Clique and reestablish his board, he's going to get hit by this Tarmogoyf again. His plans could potentially be blown up by something as innocuous as a Wasteland. So even though this isn't a horrible setup for Tom, he does have to be wary about getting too aggressive here.
Yes, so Jessy now has 6 power worth of creatures in play. Tom decides to just play the Pendelhaven and pass back to Jessy. Jessy's going to do a main phase Brainstorm here, dig for a little more action. Pretty good start for Jessy. He's got the creatures he needs, and it looks like he drew a pretty good set of cards there in Spell Pierce, Lightning Bolt, and Submerge. So Submerge is going to be a really key card for him here.
And this is the recipe for being Infect. You need to get a clock established, and then you have to have multiple cheap pieces of disruption. It can't just be a single plow or a single bolt. The Infect deck's easily capable of playing over the top of that, but if you're able to put together Lightning Bolt plus Submerge, or Submerge plus Spell Pierce, those are much harder for Tom to fight through.
Yeah, so Tom, unfortunately, his Infect creature is Inkmouth Nexus, so he needs to constantly use mana to activate it, which puts more pressure on his mana, which means he can't actually get full use out of his Vines of the Vastwood, cast multiple spells. So Tom under a little pressure here. Jessy has Spell Pierce and 2 pieces of creature removal, along with 2 3-power creatures in play.
I'm curious to see if Tom's going to try to offer up a block here.
So, yeah, just because he didn't attack last turn doesn't mean he necessarily wants to block. Maybe he just didn't feel like an attack would have been profitable. But with Jessy attacking with both creatures, Tom must feel that Jessy probably has a number of removal spells in his hand.
It's also possible he didn't attack last turn out of respect for Submerge.
So it looks like Vines will get cast, and Daze. So Daze was another card in Jesse's hand, and he's going to pay with it using the Inkmouth Nexus. Unfortunately, it will mean he won't be able to block this turn.
Yeah.
But he does counter this Submerge.
So Jessy just doing a double take here to make sure. Tom can't be too upset about getting through a Daze and a Submerge here relatively unscathed. All it means is he's down to Vines and he took 3 additional points of damage. So Tom navigated that pretty bad situation well, all told.
Yes, so he draws a Flusterstorm. So he has Flusterstorm, Stifle as blue cards in his hand, along with another copy of Vines of the Vastwood. And it looks like 2 more lands, Dryad Arbor and an Inkmouth Nexus, and a Forest.
And the Dryad Arbor could also play a critical role in this game, as it gives Tom a chump blocker on the ground for that Tarmogoyf. Now, of course, mana is still the bottleneck, it appears.
So yes, it looks like we're going to have an activation. We're playing Inkmouth Nexus, activate the other one, and attack, pumping it with Pendelhaven, putting 2 poison counters on Jessy. So yeah, that last play of the turn with the Submerge and Daze, Tom did, he wasn't able to block like he probably wanted to, but still, he was able to counter the Submerge, so he didn't have to redraw the Nexus. So suddenly things don't look that bad for Tom, despite the fact that Jessy is attacking for 6 a turn.
Yeah, I mean, Jessy is representing lethal next turn, so Tom is certainly in some amount of immediate danger, but given the amount of cheap, powerful disruption Jessy had access to, actually fairly innocuous all told what the actual outcome was. And there's an Invigorate. Oh no, sorry, crop rotation. Oh, I thought I saw Invigorate.
So Tom draws a crop rotation here. Crop rotation, not really that effective here. He already has the Nexus in play. He could get a Wasteland to turn off a Volcanic Island to make sure that there isn't any Lightning Bolt shenanigans. Jessy has, I believe, one card left in his hand maybe, but I think it might be a Spell Pierce. So he needs to probably play the Dryad Arbor here to get a blocker for the Tarmogoyf, but he's still facing potentially six flying creatures if Delver of Secrets flips.
Yeah, that Delver of Secrets is actually a pretty big draw here for Jessy, as it means if there's a spell on top, it is lethal next turn.
And it is a Lightning Bolt, so I'm pretty sure this is going to be lethal regardless. Yeah, so everything's going to come over, and Tom Ross isn't able to mount a defense there. So Jesse Hefner, with a really impressive start there, was able to win the second game. So we're tied up here in the match.
And even though Jesse won that game, that has to feel a little harrowing that you had a very good clock, a lot of cheap pieces of disruption there, and Tom was still not that far away from being able to kill you.
Yeah, if he draws an Invigorate, that plus Vines of the Vastwood actually is lethal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think Jesse might have had a Spell Pierce, but either way, it just goes to show you how powerful a deck like Infect is. I mean, you can win just out of nowhere sometimes.
So we talked about Jesse's sideboarding a little bit during, in between games 1 and 2. The players sideboarded so fast that we didn't really get to even touch Tom's sideboard, which is 2 Necropedes, a Viridian Corruptor, a Dismember, 2 Flusterstorms, 2 Force of Wills, 4 Nature's Claims, 2 Submerges, and a Bojuka Bog. I think you're going to see the 2 Submerges come in. We saw Tom with Flusterstorm in hand, so he's brought in at least one, probably both. I think Dismember is a reasonable sideboard card. As long as Tom can blunt Jesse's early offense, he has a lot of time to set up shop. That game, Jesse's draw was just too fast, but if Tom can just kill creatures, even at the cost of some life, it buys him a lot of time. I also think you're going to see the 1 copy of Bojuka Bog come in. It may not necessarily be a crop rotation target for Tom, although it may be in certain circumstances. But I think he's happy to draw a random Bojuka Bog over the course of most games, as Jesse is really heavily relying on his graveyard with Tarmogoyf and Nimble Mongoose.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Tom, the way he's been playing these games, feels like the inevitability is on his side. So as long as he is able to just keep off the pressure from Jesse, he thinks he just will eventually win. And it certainly seems that way, based on just the way these games are playing out. So, yeah, I definitely agree with the Dismember. Flusterstorm, we already saw, and that makes total sense, too, because it's one of those spells that allows him to be a little more proactive with his pump spells, because even if Jesse does have, like, responses, Flusterstorm can counter almost every spell that Jesse tries to cast. So, pretty good sideboard card there as well. So we'll see how this game 3 plays out. Again, Tom is going to be on the play, which is really huge for his deck. And I think the fact that he's going to be on the play for the majority of these games, like even if he's going to be on the play this game, let's say he loses the 4th game, he still will get to be on the play again in game 5. So being on the play is just so huge for him.
Yeah, keep it in mind, yes, the elimination rounds here, best 3 out of 5, really magnifies the importance of sideboarding. And like you mentioned, at some point in this match, Jesse Hefner has to break serve to be able to win the match. And that's just a very tough thing to do against Tom's deck.
Yeah, so invitational top 8s, they're still best of 5 throughout the entire top 8. That is different than the Grand Prix top 8s and Pro Tour top 8s, I believe. I think that was a change that was made recently where they moved to best of 3 and only the finals are best of 5. What do you think about that?
There
was some controversy when that was first mentioned. People weren't sure if it was a good change. Whenever there's change in the Magic community, there's always talk about, oh, it's terrible, it's a great idea, whatever. You know, how do you feel about switching from a best of 5 to best of 3 format?
I will say anything in the interest of trying to expedite the coverage or make it a little bit more efficient, I'm sympathetic to. I don't know if that's the primary motivator here, but I will say that when you hit the elimination rounds and the tension mounts up and the matches matter for a lot of money and a lot of prestige, I just like playing best 3 out of 5. The only thing that I dislike about it is it magnifies the significance of sideboards. So it sort of distorts how 2 out of 3 matches versus 3 out of 5 matchups play. There's some places where in a 2 out of 3 match, one player A would be favored, and a 3 out of 5 player B is actually favored because of the sideboarding. I'm not a huge fan of that, but that's pretty minor as far as critique goes. Yeah. And I just like the additional drama of we play more games, one random mulligan or bad hand is unlikely to determine the outcome of a match. And let's just play more Magic.
Yep.
These matches are fun. They matter for a lot. Let's play as many games as we can.
So we're off to the races in Game 3 here. Tom leads with a Glistener Elf, the first time he's made an appearance in this match. And Jessy follows up with a Volcanic Island and a Lightning Bolt on it. Tom responds with a Daze, but it looks like Jessy has a Force of Will.
Wow, and Jessy is showing a lot of respect here for these Infect creatures, as he should. Anyone resolving could potentially produce lethal next turn, and I'm sure he's loath to trade a Force of Will with a Daze, but that's what you got to do sometimes.
So Tom just replays the Tropical Island and passes back. Jessy plays a Misty Rainforest and a Delver of Secrets. So Jessy had both a Lightning Bolt, Force of Will, and now he has the pressure that he needs. So far he has what he needs in order to try to defeat Tom. But Tom plays an Inkmouth Nexus and now a second Glistener Elf. So basically he's been able to put 2 Infect creatures in play on this turn. So pretty good turn for Tom. Although it looks like Jessy has yet another Force of Will pitching a Brainstorm. So he's being very aggressive here. Doesn't have that many resources left. He has a Delver of Secrets in play and only 1 card left in his hand. And it's going to be a Pyroblast that gets revealed with a Delver of Secrets. So on his upkeep, he's actually going to flip the Delver of Secrets, but he's going to sacrifice the Misty Rainforest because he doesn't really want that Pyroblast.
Yeah, there's more pressing needs right now. He needs to find an answer to Inkmoth Nexus. Pyroblast doesn't offer very much help there. Looking for something like Wasteland, maybe some other form of creature removal.
So smart sequencing there from Jessy. He's able to, oh wow. So he's able to dodge drawing that card but flip his Delver. But Tom actually has a Submerge. So once the Tropical Island gets found, he casts it for free. And Jessy just draws the Delver for the turn.
And draws and says go.
Yes.
So
interesting, he decided not to cast it. So what do you think that means there by not casting the Delver Secrets?
He could have his sideboarded copy of Destructive Revelry. He plays 1 in his board. It wouldn't surprise me if he brought in a Shatter effect to try to fight over Inkmoth Nexus. The problem here, of course, is it's a huge opportunity cost for Jessy to leave up 2 mana. His Rug Delver deck does not play with that many lands in general, and how long is he committed to just leaving up all these lands? Keep in mind, he's already Force of Will twice, so he's very low on resources in general.
Yes, so Tom did not activate his Nexus in attack. He did not. He might be concerned with Lightning Bolt. He may be thinking about the Destructive Revelry that you mentioned. It's also possible he brought it an Ancient Grudge, which, yes, it looks like that is an Ancient Grudge. So you're definitely right. He left up 2 mana because one of them is an artifact removal spell. And now Tom is going to activate. Now that there's no longer 2 mana up, he's going to activate one of his Nexus attack. He does have Vines of Vastwood now as protection as well. So Jessy has that Ancient Grudge. He's going to reveal with Delver of Secrets. It is not going to flip, so Delver is going to remain a Delver, not Insecto Aberration. That's going to swing over for 1. Tom falls to 19. And Jessy, he has that Ancient Grudge, so that's going to prove to be pretty effective. However, he's going to tap 1 of his mana again to play a second Delver of Secrets, so he won't be able to cast the Ancient Grudge yet again.
And here's the intriguing thing about all of this. He left up 2 mana when Tom knew there was a Delver in his hand. Tom may not respect the possibility of him having a 1 mana piece of disruption. Because if he had a Lightning Bolt, let's say, he probably recast the Delver. So Tom might be aware of the fact that something along the lines of Ancient Grudge or Destructive Revelry or something in that space, a 2 mana form of disruption, could be what Jessy actually has access to.
So Delvers did not flip yet again. He revealed, I believe, a land, which was a Scalding Tarn, now comes into play. So now he has access to 3 mana, so he can actually cast Ancient Grudge and flash it back. However, Tom does have a Vines of the Vastwood. Looks like he drew a Crop Rotation for the turn as well. He also has a Flusterstorm in his hand. And it looks like he's just going to pass here. So, yes, Tom definitely suspects that there's probably an Ancient Grudge in Jesse's hand. And now we see the Delvers finally flip, and they flip because of a Submerge. So great turn there for Jessy.
Although keep in mind, Tom has access to a Crop Rotation. He can Crop Rotate away his Tropical Island if he wants to. That shuts off Submerge. If he replaces this Tropical Island with, let's say, a Pendlehaven, he can still cast green spells and no longer have to play around Submerge.
Yes, that's true. He can actually sacrifice. If he's going to do that, though, he actually has to cast it now. Because once the Submerge gets cast, that's it. So
Correct.
He has to get rid of the Tropical Island before he activates his Nexus if he wants to block. So a little update for you on some of our other matches. Derek Sheets and Christopher Arnold, Deathblade versus Loam, they are tied at 1-1, so they're going into Game 3. Another update for you, Wilson Hunter, the Storm deck, he's up 2 games against Joe Lissette and his Miracle deck.
Wow, and Joe now has to win 3 games in a row, 2 of them on the draw to advance to the semifinals.
Yeah, so Joe's got his back against the wall there to kind of advance. We'll get an update for you as soon as we can on that one. But here we have, see 2 insectile operations attacking, and they drop Tom down to 11, and Jessy just passes back. Looks like Tom's going to try to cast a Brainstorm in his main phase. Jessy's going to sacrifice a Scalding Tarn here. Is it going to resolve? Yes, it looks like it is going to resolve. And he's going to get a Tropical Island. So let's see what Jessy's going to do. Maybe he might have been just trying to play around Stifle, which Tom does have in his hand, actually. So yes, Jessy doesn't have a response to the Brainstorm. Brainstorm resolves, and it looks like we have an Invigorate, Submerge, and a Noble Hierarch. So pretty good draw there for Tom. He draws an Invigorate, which is obviously a key spell. Submerge is also very important. Plus, he draws, it looks like a Noble Hierarch.
The problem here, again, is that Tom is bottlenecked on mana, particularly in the face of this Ancient Grudge that he correctly suspects Jessy has access to. He really needs to actually find more mana to start casting all the stuff that's in his hand.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if he could possibly crop rotate for a Wasteland and Wasteland the Volcanic Island if he thinks that, if he really does suspect that there is an Ancient Grudge in Jessy's hand. And now he knows Jessy's not going to draw land because he just submerged on his upkeep. So Delver of Secrets gets drawn for Jessy. He attacks with his other insectile aberration, and Tom falls to 8 now. So Tom draws his card for the turn. Looks like it is that crop rotation. And he's going to activate it and cast double Invigorate and crop rotate in response to the Invigorate.
So he's holding priority the entire time here. So there's no opportunity for Jessy to submerge.
Yeah, so great sequencing there for Tom. And then he floats mana, he crop rotates in response, and Jessy does have the Ancient Grudge. So wow, interesting sequence here. I think if Tom actually crop rotated first and then activated Nexus, he might have been able to win this game. But instead, Ancient Grudge does resolve and he loses his Nexus. Now crop rotation will resolve. So interesting that he decided to activate first. I think he needs the forest in play, right?
Yes. The alternate cost of Invigorate is if you control a forest.
He actually had to, so he had to use it while the Tropical Island was still in play. Unfortunately, he couldn't use the Flusterstorm or the Vines of the Vastwood in his hand.
And so that's a lesson for Jessy there, for future games. He can't, the threat of crop rotating away Tom's only forest means that he can't wait until the absolute last second to crop rotate, to submerge there.
So Tom made a bold move there, tried to go for it. Unfortunately, Jessy had both Submerge and Ancient Grudge. Tom played around the Submerge, but he couldn't play around everything. So Jessy now in pretty good shape. He still has the Ancient Grudge flashback in his graveyard to deal with the second Inkmouth Nexus. So, and he has 2 Insecta Aberrations flipped, and Tom is only at 8 life. So it is going to be difficult for Tom to pull out this game.
Yeah, and Jessy's just found a Wasteland, too, that all about locks this up.
So Tom, it seemed like Tom was playing around. It seemed like Tom was playing around some sort of artifact removal for most of the game. We saw like early on, he didn't activate his Nexus and attack. We thought maybe he's playing around artifact removal there. You don't think he's playing around Lightning Bolt, but maybe Tom just felt like, this is my moment. I have to do something here. There are 2 Delver Secrets in play. I'm probably not going to get a better opportunity than right now.
Yeah, it's also, it's not 100% in that spot that Jessy has Ancient Grudge or Destructive Revelry. He may, for example, be holding up Lightning Bolt and playing around Daze.
Yeah.
So, it's reasonable for Tom to believe that his sequencing there is good. It's almost impossible for him to be an artifact spell, but given the fact that Jessy was applying so much pressure, and also had the option of simply holding back a Delver of Secrets if he ever feared getting killed, meant that Tom picked this spot to go for it, and Jessy just had enough stuff to fight through it.
Yeah, and just Tom was a little, even if he had another forest, Submerge would still get turned on, so it didn't really matter. But yeah, there's really nothing Tom could have done in that game differently. He sequenced everything correctly. Unfortunately, Jessy just had 2 pieces of removal. So now we're moving to game 3. Tom is now down a game. The match is now 2-1 in Jessy's favor. Tom will be on the play again. However, Jessy did break serve.
Yeah,
so
that's
key.
Step number 1.
So a little update on one of our other matches, our backup match. Betcher and Greg Spano, that match is all tied up at 1-1.
Yeah,
so,
Greg able to take game 2.
Yes, the two ships passing in a night, the matchup that we weren't really sure how that was going to play out. It is proving to be difficult for them as well, as it is now evened up. So Mud versus Painter, we'll see how that one goes. We have that matchup evened up. We have Loam versus Deathblade. That match is at even up as well. And then the only matchup where there is a favorite is Wilson Hunter, who is up 2 games versus Joe Lissette. So we'll see how that match goes as well. But currently we are knee deep in this Rug Delver versus Infect matchup. Jesse Hefner up 2 games versus Tom Ross. Both games he won after the first one, it seems like he just drew a lot of removal spells and was able to get a lot of pressure early on. So after the board, I think the addition of Submerge and now Ancient Grudge is proving to be very difficult for Tom to kind of overcome.
Yeah, it's all this is predicated on Jesse having a quick clock, though, because Tom has shown a capability of playing around multiple removal spells when he's not under any sort of pressure. The other issue that Tom had that game was just not having a second green or blue mana. As good as Inkmoth Nexus is, I'm sure Tom would have gladly traded one in for another tropical island, as he was bottlenecked on the number of spells he could chain together in a single turn.
Yeah, Tom had multiple copies of Vines of the Vastwood in his hand. He just didn't have enough mana to cast it. So obviously, if he has the mana, that entire scenario is different. He doesn't need to be as aggressive with his crop rotation. He doesn't need to necessarily play around Submerge that turn. And the whole game could just be different there. He could have even searched out a Wasteland to take out Jesse's only red source if he just had more mana to work with. Unfortunately, Tom just couldn't do it. But I'm with you. I think Jesse it's not enough for him to have removal. He needs removal backed by significant pressure.
Yeah.
And both times that he won, it wasn't just one Delver or one Nimble Mongoose. It was usually Tarmogoyf, Click, or double Delver Secrets. It's like significant pressure with multiple pieces of removal. So just kind of shows you how impressive Tom's deck is. But his back is against the wall here. He's going to have to win 2 games in a row.
Another update, Derek Sheets playing Esper Control, up 2-1 over Chris Arnold and his Loam Smallpox.
Loam Smallpox deck, yeah. Grindy, has Tombstalkers, Bloodghast. Weird, very strange deck. A lot of discard Liliana the Veil, but he's going to have his work cut out for him as well. Again, his back is against the wall. He's got to win 2 games in a row.
Traditionally, against Smallpox type strategies, Jason the Mind Sculptor has proven to be pretty effective if you can get it into play.
Yeah, all those Pox decks, if you could just get some lands into play, if you can get to 3 mana, you're usually in pretty good shape. Derek's got to feel pretty good about his chances to at least pull one of those games out. Looks like Jesse's going to keep his opening 7. However, Tom is going to mulligan down to 6. He is on the play. So he still has that going for him. Unfortunately, he is going to have to try to sculpt together a 6-card hand here and try to overcome Jesse's abundance of removal.
Yeah, that's going to be, again, as you mentioned, really hard in the face of how much, not just removal, but cheap or free removal. Jesse has the capability of chaining together multiple spells in a single turn.
Yeah. And I have to say, both players are actually playing really well. It seems like they both probably tested the night before and kind of understood the ins and outs of the matchups. We see Jesse very aggressively countering any infect creatures. You can kind of tell that he probably tested this matchup the night before. Tom, obviously, piloting the infect deck pretty well. So kind of goes to show you that both players really know what they're doing here.
Yeah, Jesse has not been messing around with those Force of Wills.
So Jesse reveals a hand of Spell Pierce, Lightning Bolt, and Nimble Mongoose. So not nearly as powerful as some of the hands we've seen previously, although he does have a Wasteland, which could prove problematic for Tom, especially because of a mulligan here. So if Tom kept a hand of like Tropical Island and Spell, that could be pretty problematic for him. So it looks like he does have a Wasteland and a Tropical Island, along with a Submerge, Stifle, and a Wasteland of his own. So no infect creature currently.
Not a very powerful opening 7 for Jesse, but it does have the mixture of pressure, removal, and disruption that he's looking for in the matchup.
So Tom sees the Wasteland, still leaves a Tropical Island, kind of baiting Jesse to Wasteland it, but Tom does have a Stifle, so nice play there for Tom, although he also have a Daze. So Jesse leads off with a Nimble Mongoose, which just gets dazed by Tom. Tom has no lands in play, but he did draw a Blighted Agent for the turn. Let's see if he's going to lead with that Tropical Island again, or if he's going to Wasteland Jesse's Tropical Island.
And Tom showing appropriate respect for Jesse as well. As long as he can keep Jesse off of having a clock, the game gets a lot easier. But he knows that once he's under the gun, it forces his hand, and then he plays right into all of Jesse's cheap and free disruption.
Yeah, so Jessy doesn't have any creatures, and Tom, off the Gitaxian Probe from turn 1, he knows that. However, he knows that Jessy does have at least one Lightning Bolt. We know at home that Jessy drew another Lightning Bolt this turn, so let's see what Tom decides to do. Tom has that Wasteland. He might try to use the Wasteland to go after Jesse's one red source, because Bladed Agent here, probably not the best play considering you know that Jessy has at least one Lightning Bolt in his hand. Not sure if Tom has a way to protect the Bladed Agent just yet.
Yeah, the issue is that you know that Jessy has a Misty Rainforest as well, so you can't exactly cut him off here unless you're willing to try to fight over Stifle as well in the Misty Rainforest the following turn.
Yeah, so he does have, he has the Stifle in his hand. Unfortunately, you know that Jessy has the Spell Pierce, so Stifle not necessarily going to resolve there, so he might have to wait a couple of turns before he actually uses the Wasteland. But it looks like Jessy drew another sack land in Scalding Tarn. So yeah, Tom's going to, we're going to see an Wasteland activation from Jessy targeting Tropical Island. Tom could try to stifle it, however, he knows Jessy has a Spell Pierce, so it's no point in doing that. He's going to float some mana. And Jesse's going to cast a Ponder here. And that resolves. So yeah, Tom just has a Blighted Agent, Daze, Stifle, and Submerge in his hand along with that Wasteland.
But still, as bad as the opening looks here for Tom, he is still probably pretty happy with the pacing of the game as long as Jessy doesn't find a creature.
Yeah, Jessy found yet another removal spell in Fire and Ice. And it looks like he might not have played a land this turn. Oh, he played a Wasteland, sorry. So Wasteland was played, and now we're on Tom's turn. Tom drew a Force of Will. So he has plenty of counter spells, and he has a Submerge to kind of interact with Jesse's side if Jessy ever gets a creature into play. Unfortunately, he just doesn't have any infect creatures. He has one Blighted Agent, but again, no pump spells to kind of save it, and he knows that Jessy has a Lightning Bolt.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Tom was just happy to play Draw Go for a little bit, a while in this board state. Again, he's under no pressure himself. He knows that Jessy has pretty easy answers to what is in Tom's hand as it currently stands. So there's no huge rush to play into any of this stuff. Tom can simply choose to wait.
So Tom is going to use Wasteland, targeting the Volcanic Island. So keeping Jessy off mana a little bit, but we know that Jessy has multiple sack lands in his hand, so he will be able to find another red source. And he is going to play the Misty Rainforest right now. And he could sack it, try to force Tom to use the Stifle now, but he's just going to pass back.
Yeah, Jesse's showing a lot of patience too.
Yeah, Jessy feels he doesn't really need to rush anything either. He's got a lot of removal spells, so I think he's sort of comfortable playing this game as well. Yep, Tom thinking about using the Stifle there, but then he remembers that there is a Spell Pierce in Jesse's hand. He does have a Force of Will and a Daze in his hand, so he might actually just go for it here. Yeah, so we're going to see a Stifle, and then we'll see a Spell Pierce from Jessy, and we're going to see a Daze back from Tom. So Tom is able to keep red off the board for the foreseeable future.
And I like this play a lot from Tom because he was able to trade in two cards that have diminishing value as the game progresses at its current pace for some mana, which is a pretty nice exchange. That Daze and Stifle aren't getting any better while both players are sitting here playing Draw Go. So that is a good battle to fight, I feel.
So Jessy casts Ponder. Right now, I think Jessy just needs, a threat and more mana. He's got plenty of removal. Ponder's going to try to set up his draw for the next few turns. He needs to be careful with that Scalding Tarn, though. He doesn't want to lose it to another Stifle. He doesn't know whether or not Tom has it. And again, despite the fact he has a lot of removal spells, but he doesn't have a lot of red mana right now, so he's got to be very careful. Tom did draw a Crop Rotation, so that will allow him to find an Inkmouth Nexus if he chooses. He doesn't have any other Wastelands in his deck, I believe.
Yeah, there's only one copy, and it's essentially just a tutor target.
So we're going to see a Nimble Mongoose, finally a creature on Jesse's side of the board. He is close to having Threshold. That is one creature that Tom, unfortunately, will not be able to submerge.
And this is really bad news for Tom. As you mentioned, the Submerge does nothing against it, and is going to put him on the gun, and his hand's nowhere near equipped to go off anytime in the near future. He may actually have to force a will this Nimble Mongoose to buy himself some more time to assemble a hand that's capable of fighting through a Lightning Bolt and whatever else Jessy has racked up in his hand.
Yes, and that's exactly what happens. He pitches the Submerge to Force of Will, countering the Nimble Mongoose. So just wants to make sure that there aren't any creatures on Jesse's side of the board, hoping to eventually cobble together some sort of offense. Still has that Blighted Agent. He still has that Crop Rotation. But beyond that, it looks like he might have drawn a Berserk.
Still a ways away.
A ways away, yes. And he just has to pass the turn. So Jesse's just going to untap. Thought about sacking the Scalding Tarn, but thought against it. And now we finally see a Delver Secrets. Delver Secrets makes an appearance. That will resolve. Tom doesn't have that Submerge anymore because he pitched it to the Force of Will. So Jessy plays that and passes back to Tom. And it looks like Jesse's gonna activate it on Tom's upkeep. So he sacks a Scalding Tarn, that will resolve, and that's gonna get a Volcanic Island. So Jessy is back on red mana.
And there was some risk there if Tom had a Submerge. He could have simply killed the Delver outright, but only 2 in the sideboard there, so pretty good spot to go for it.
So Brainstorm resolves from Tom. He reveals Daze, Pendlehaven, and a Verdant Catacombs. So it looks like he's going to put the Blighted Agent and the Crop Rotation on top of his library. He could shuffle those away if he chooses. He has a sack land in play plus another one that he drew. Let's see if he's going to play a Pendlehaven. Yes, so we're going to see a Pendlehaven. Looks like he has a Berserk and a Berserk Daze in his hand.
Yeah.
Yep. So Jessy reveals for Delver. It does not flip. It is just a Scalding Tarn. So he has access to another red potentially to go along with all those Lightning Bolts in his hand and the Fire Ice.
Yeah, I'm sure Jessy would have preferred to flip the Delver here, but he has to be pretty happy about finding additional mana.
So Delver Secrets comes over for 1. Looks like we're going to see a Berserk yet again. Very aggressive Berserks there for Tom, being used as removal basically. And we're going to see a Submerge. So looks like Tom's going to read Submerge to make sure it says target creature and not target opponent's creature. So, put target creature on top of his owner's library. So Delver Secrets will go on top of Jesse's library. And you could tell both players know exactly what they need in this matchup.
I really like this play a lot from Jessy, as it'd be pretty easy to sit back and say, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to keep the Submerge. It's a great insurance policy against whatever Tom does. I can afford to lose this Delver. But he knows once he starts clocking Tom, with Tom having as little resources as he has right now, only 3 cards in hand, now going down to 2, it's elementary for him to be able to win the game from there.
Yep.
The biggest risk is giving Tom time to reassemble a hand. So even though it would have been very easy to just make a very passive play there and say, all right, whatever, that's fine. Jessy understands that he really needs that clock in play, willing to use a Submerge to make sure that he has a Delver to play next turn.
So Tom, with just a Daze and a Blighted Agent in hand, he sacrifices Verdant Catacombs, goes down to 16, finds a Tropical Island, and he's going to play the Blighted Agent finally. And that is going to be met with a Lightning Bolt. And now Jessy will draw the Delver Secrets and replay it. Tom just draws a card for his turn, and he's going to pass back immediately. Delver Secrets gets flipped by a Lightning Bolt. So Jessy has a Chain Lightning Bolt, I believe another Lightning Bolt in his hand along with a Fire Ice. So much removal that Tom has to fight through here.
Yeah, an incredible density. It's actually insane at this point. Jesse's bottleneck is red mana, not removal.
Yeah.
That's how much removal he has.
And at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if we just started seeing Lightning Bolts coming towards Tom's face.
Yep.
Being at 13, he's going to be at 10 after another attack. So yeah, Jessy has more than enough burn to finish Tom off. And that is what we're going to see.
Yep.
Chain Lightning to Tom's face.
And this is the death knell. I mean, if Jesse's willing to use a removal spell that way, you have to assume what else could be in his hand. He hasn't been really casting very much. He seemed committed to keeping that Delver of Secrets around, willing to submerge it.
So Tom goes down to 9, sacking Windswept Heath to find a Dryad Arbor. It looks like he also drew an Invigorate. So he has a land, Invigorate, and a Daze in his hand. So just comes over with the Dryad Arbor, pumps it with the Pendlehaven. It looks like Jesse's actually going to target the Dryad Arbor with fire and split it between Tom and the Dryad Arbor, dropping Tom to 8. Let's see if Tom wants to actually daze this or not. Yes, he will daze it, and he's just going to pass for the turn. Oh, he will play Tropical Island. So Jessy Hefner untaps. With Tom at 9, I believe he has enough burn to finish him off. Just needs a Lightning Bolt. Do we have a second Lightning Bolt? And he does, yes. So Jessy Hefner defeats Tom Ross 3-1. After losing the first game, Jessy rattles off 3 straight wins on the back of Delver of Secrets, and multiple removal spells.
Yeah, and Submerge was especially challenging.